This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Rada back with episode 88 of A Geek Leader podcast, and today is going to be a solo episode. I'm going to try to do one of these at least once a month where I spend some time writing and coming up with a concept or something that has helped me that I can share with you guys going forward. And today's title of the episode is The Fifth Why, and it's going to be all about how to get to that fifth why. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, well, it'll make sense in just a little bit, so just hang tight. So by now it's probably middle of January, end of January, and you've probably set up a New Year's resolution if you're like 70% of the population, or if you're like me, you probably didn't. But either way, you may have had a New Year's resolution. If so, you probably broke it by now, because they say the odds are like 80% of the country will set New Year's resolutions and break them by the first 2 weeks of January. So we're past that, so it's likely that you've broken that New Year's resolution, and that's okay. Because it happens. It happens to all of us. We all set goals and resolutions and things like that we try to achieve, and we usually break them. We don't always see it through to the end, and that's okay because we're human. A lot of the common resolutions are things like to eat healthier, to get in shape, to be nicer to people. That's one that I've had in the past. To stop eating junk food or fast food, stop drinking so much, etc., etc., etc. If you picked one of those, then that's fine. But if you pick something totally different, that's cool too. So why is it that we choose January 1st to be that day where we set goals and resolutions? Any ideas, any thoughts? Well, this is really broken down in a book by Dan Pink called When, where he talks about kind of the scientific ideas of perfect timing. And he talks a lot in that book. It's a really fascinating book. I highly recommend it. But he talks a lot about kind of when the best time of day to start certain things are, when the best day of the week, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the ideas is that it's easier for us to get started on something if we see this as a new beginning or a new thing. We're turning over a new leaf. All that stuff, it makes it easier to start something new. It's really difficult to start a workout routine or a new diet kind of midweek or the middle of a day. Because you kind of think, well, I've already kind of blown this week. Why start now? Let's just keep going. We'll start fresh a different day or a different week. And that's kind of the idea of starting something new. And that's kind of where New Year's resolutions came from, is you want to start something new. What better time than the beginning of a year, beginning of a new calendar year? Let's start something new. And that's also a lot of times when we as business leaders set new goals. We have goals for 2019. And when we set new goals, we need to obviously do SMART goals, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But some of the things that drive us to achieve these resolutions and these goals are our motivation. And if you want to learn more about motivation, I've had two great guests on about that. John Hitler, The Motivation Trap, and Jeff Haden, Motivation Myth. Both great books, both great episodes. I'll link them up in the show notes, but check those out for sure. But going back to figuring out what these New Year's resolutions and some of the things that have helped me whenever I've failed or I've set a goal or resolution to get through it is to think about, why did I set this to begin with? So if we take the scenario of maybe I want to get in shape, I want to get healthy. Let's take that one and break it down. So why do I want to get healthy? Well, I want to look better around the pool. Okay, well, why do you want to look better around the pool? And if I keep going down that path and ask myself those 5 whys, which is called the 5 why protocol, I'll eventually find out that basically I want to be happier. I want to be happier with myself. I want to be happier with the way I look at myself, the way I perceive myself. That's kind of where that comes down to. So what will make me happier? What will get me to that point? And if I focus on the happiness that I'll achieve in the end, instead of focusing on the fact that I need to, eat healthier or go running twice a week or work out these certain days, if I focus on the end goal of being happy and not necessarily the task that I have to do in order to get that happiness, I'm more likely to achieve those goals. Because honestly, it's not fun to hit the gym and work out. At least not for me. It might be for some people. For me, it's not fun. It's just something you have to do, right? If you want to achieve those goals, it's not fun for me to eat healthy all the time. It's just one of those things you have to do or you need to do in order to achieve the goal of happiness. But if I focus on the being happy aspect or portion of the goal, the end in mind, that will help me be able to I don't know if you want to say suffer through, but to do the things that aren't necessarily the end game of being happy, but there's something you have to do in order to get to that point. So let's break down this 5 why protocol. Wikipedia, and I'm just going to link to it in the show notes, has some really good information about the 5 why protocol. They talk about kind of how it got started and how it was used in Toyota to kind of do a whole evolution of the manufacturing methodologies and how it's a critical component in problem solving, because you're not just treating the symptoms, you're going down to the underlying cause of the problems. And one of the cool things that you can think about when you get to the why is understanding that someone actually created some rules for performing the 5 why protocol. One of them, and I'm not going to read these in order or go through all the list, but I'll talk about some of the things that you should do, is to write down the problem in a way that everybody understands it. So if you're doing this in a business sense or business case, think about what is the way that this problem, or what are you trying to solve, or what is the symptom, what is the issue. Write it down in a way that everybody understands it, so there's no confusion about what this is, and then dig into why. And try to make the answers more precise every time you go down a layer. So every time you dig a little deeper, try to get more specific, more precise in your answers. Look for the cause step by step. Don't jump to any conclusions about, if I eat healthier, I'm obviously going to be, I'm going to lose weight. Well, not necessarily. There's other components that come into that. So don't just jump to the next conclusion. Assess the process, not necessarily the people involved in the process. So think about the verbs, right? The actions that are going on, not necessarily the nouns. And that's the way I try to think of it, is always think about the verbs. What's the verb in this? What's the action? Not necessarily what the noun is. And always ask the question why until a root cause is figured out. So it may be 5 whys, it may be 3 whys, it may be 7 whys. Who knows? But keep asking the why until you get to the end. 5 is just kind of a number it's a nice clean round number. I think scientifically that's where a lot of them wind up, the average. But if we just keep going until we get to the end, that's the best way to get to the 5 why answer. So it's a really good exercise to do within your team. Sometimes you may come off as a jerk if you do it the wrong way, if you keep asking why. But if you do it kind of in a friendly way, to like you're sincerely trying to figure out the problem, not like you want to shut someone down on their idea, you come across as really caring, more empathetic. It's one of those things that I've talked about before with tactical empathy. It kind of builds upon that of being a more empathetic boss or empathetic leader. So that's the 5 why protocol in general. Now I want to touch back on SMART goals. I've talked about this in the podcast before. I've talked about it for many years, but let's go through the acronym of SMART. It's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. Whenever you're setting up your goals, you really need to stick to these. And if you don't, it's really hard to determine whether you've achieved a goal. It's hard to stay on track with the goal. It's hard to see where your progress is. Lots of issues and problems when you don't have specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, or time-bound goals. So I'll give you an example of one of my goals for 2019 in relationship to the podcast. Now, when I set up goals, I set up goals for personal life. I set up goals for podcasts. I set up goals for work. Lots of different things like that around goals. But one of the podcast goals that I had was to increase first quarter podcast downloads by 10% over fourth quarter 2018 download numbers. So if you want to break this down, specific, increase podcast downloads, very specific. What's the goal? Increase podcast downloads. Okay. Is it measurable? Yes, I can log into my podcast host, Libsyn, check the stats, and I said in the goal, by 10% over fourth quarter number. So I know exactly the metric that I'm trying to hit, 10% greater than what I had for the total of the fourth quarter by the end of the first quarter. That also jumps the time bound, which we'll get to in just a second. Is it achievable? Is a 10% increase in downloads achievable? I definitely think it was. If I look at my history, I've increased downloads more than 10% most quarters anyway. Fourth quarter was a little bit less because I produced less episodes than I did third quarter. So with an increase in episodes or more marketing, more better content, all those things can definitely make this goal achievable. Is it relevant? Is it relevant to my end game of hosting a Geek Leader podcast? Well, I host this podcast because I want to talk to really cool people. I want to share. I want to become a better leader myself. I want to learn more. I want to develop better content to help people out. And yes, increasing downloads is a direct metric that relates to an increase in good content and better guests and better episodes, all relating to how I produce this podcast. So it's definitely relevant. And is it time bound? Well, I already mentioned that a little bit. That I talked about that this is time bound. It needs to be achieved by the end of the first quarter. I can look at the metrics and see what that is. So it meets all those criteria for SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Now, I highly recommend that you guys also apply the idea of SMART goals whenever you're setting up goals for your team, yourself, or anything else that you want to achieve. It just helps you stay on track and helps you see. I can check, halfway through the first quarter, middle of February, end of February, I can kind of see where I'm at compared to where I was at the end of fourth quarter and see if I'm on track for that number. And if not, maybe I'll ramp up the episodes, and you might see another 5 episode week or something like that at the end of February, so that I can achieve that goal or try to achieve that goal. And that's one thing about podcast downloads when you think about it. I put out a new episode. Most of the downloads come like within the first couple of days of putting out that episode, because I have subscribers and people that it automatically downloads to your iPhone or your computer or something like that. But then you still get some people that listen to it on a different time period or different basis, and those will come in as they go. But you get that big hit whenever you put an episode out. So I can do more episodes and achieve that goal. Now, does that mean the content's better? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes, more content, I might be able to hit something that I missed before to make it better. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I'll definitely follow up and let you know how I'm doing with these goals, with this goal in particular. In the past, I've listed all my goals out. I'm not going to do that today because they're not necessarily relevant to the discussion that we're having here. But if you're interested, let me know, and I'll talk more about it if that's what people want to hear. I hope this is helpful. I do have a lot of guests lined up too, by the way. I was checking I use Calendly or Calendly. I don't know how you say it. Anyway, I use that app to help me schedule. And I was checking that. I've got like 5 or 6 already lined up. Right now, I've got 3 already recorded that are kind of sitting in the banks. Next episode is going to be a cybersecurity guy, which is pretty cool. So just hang tight with that. And we'll have these episodes flowing through pretty good. If you've enjoyed this episode, if you want to hear more about goals or more about some of the things that I'm doing to help you out, and you like these solo shows, hit me up on LinkedIn, Twitter, or through a geekleader.com website, or post in an iTunes review. I read all those different things, and they do help shape how I produce this content, what kind of guests I'm going to look for and try to get on. All that stuff is really important to me. So definitely send me a message. Keep me in the loop of what you're thinking, and hopefully this is helpful to somebody. And if so, definitely leave me a review, 5-star rating. All those things are awesome. I don't know if they necessarily help people find the show like I would like to think that they do, but they definitely make me feel better and make me encourage me to continue to produce the show and have good guests on. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it, and Happy New Year.